Throughout my years of collecting Apple prototypes, I've seen many variations, from large to small, early stages to late stages, and prototypes of almost every single model of Apple device. But the one thing I've come to learn is that the truly bizarre prototypes, the ones with significant hardware differences or wildly different designs, are usually from Apple's earlier days. Modern Apple, as an Apple from around 2017 and onwards, is a lot more uniform with prototype designs, and it's extremely rare that a modern device with any hardware differences ever gets to be seen outside of just a few Apple engineers. Yet today, I'm going to show you all something that I honestly thought that I would never come across. This is an iPhone model that is a blend of an iPhone 13 Pro and a 14 Pro, yet is neither. An iPhone model that for all intents and purposes represents a development branch in the timeline of Apple. This is a Vesica Piscis iPhone prototype. Now, before we get into the hardware and software of this iPhone, let's first explain the most obvious difference this prototype has from production models, which of course is, why is the Apple logo on the back been replaced by the Vesica Piscis symbol? The first and more obvious reason is that this is a security measure as to hide the fact that this is an iPhone prototype. As I've shown in previous videos, Apple will often go to far lengths to implement security measures as to ensure that unreleased devices don't get quote-unquote discovered by parties that may seek to leak the information. These measures include methods such as implementing security cases to conceal the design, or using placeholder logos as to hide the fact that the device is actually made by Apple. However, getting away from the physical reasons, there's also another underlying meaning behind the specific symbol they used. For those unaware, the Vesica Piscis, a shape created when two circles of the same radius intersect, is often associated with creation. In this case, because this iPhone includes a hardware feature that has not been found on any other regular model of iPhone, the symbol is a fitting choice by the Apple engineers as to represent what this prototype embodies. But before we get a bit too philosophical, let's go into the prototype hardware and see what we're dealing with. As we can see, if we look at the side of the iPhone that has the volume buttons, there appears to be an engraving that usually isn't there on production iPhone models. We can observe that there appears to be a data matrix, some configuration information, and the serial number of the iPhone, which for prototypes is quite standard. And from what we can determine from this engraving, this iPhone is of the Ranger prototype stage, which is for durability testing. The drop 2.5 part indicates that this prototype was dropped from 2.5 meters in height, and the D2 indicates that this is a drop 2 unit, or a second iteration of a drop test unit. Now, if we look slightly further up, we can see the volume button. Yes, I said button, singular. We're going to get back to this, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss the more haptic side of this button. Now, let's open the iPhone and observe the hardware inside. But at a first glance, we can see that things look a bit weird. Right off the bat, we can immediately see that the battery is covered in a copper-like metal. Funnily enough, this almost mirrors the new metal design of the iPhone 16 batteries. The board looks, well, like an iPhone logic board, but we'll be coming back to it when we take off the metal protective shield. The front camera and Face ID are, well, that's weird. They're not real? As in, they're just made of metal and plastic with no electronics. And if we take a look at the screen, we can see a similar story. Aside from having another engraving, matching the previous 2.5 meter drop engraving on the side, we can see that the screen is missing all of its electronics required for it to function. There's no logic and no ribbon cables for it to even connect to the iPhone. And there's a lot of other small weird changes on the inside, such as the microphone being made of clear plastic, and the camera, or should I say quote-unquote camera, literally just being a machined piece of metal. However, if we take off the metal shielding to the logic board, we can clearly see that there is some logic going on here. Even though there's only a few ribbon cables actually going to the board, there's clearly a bunch of unpopulated connectors. These connectors likely would have been used to test other components, but this also kind of hints and narrows down as to what this specific prototype was used to test. For the ribbon cables that do exist, there's one for the lightning port, obviously to supply power to the iPhone, and for the volume and power buttons. Now, why might Apple create an entire iPhone prototype with the sole purpose of testing the volume and power buttons? That's because this iPhone has a feature that has never ever been implemented on any production iPhone model: haptic volume and power buttons. This all relates to a well-known about Apple project called Project Bongo. Essentially, it's a project in where Apple is trying to implement haptic volume and power buttons into the iPhone. But from what I've been told during the research I've done for this video, this project has been going on for many years, but Apple still isn't quite ready to add these haptic buttons yet. There has even been more recent evidence of Apple continuously trying to add these buttons, such as on this iPhone 15 Pro prototype that leaked a few months ago. Now for the real question. Does this iPhone work? When we plug in a standard Apple charger, it appears that nothing happens. But this is barely surprising, considering that there's not even a ribbon cable connecting the screen to the board. But luckily for us, we can use a computer to see if there's any kind of life in it. If we look under System Information in macOS, we can see that, weirdly enough, the iPhone actually does show up, but it identifies itself as Bender. You heard that right, and yes, it is in fact a reference to the character Bender from Futurama, as Apple actually uses the name Bender on other MCU development boards. And if we connect a serial cable to this iPhone, we can actually see that it displays the text MCU init done when it's plugged in, which indicates that the prototype is actually functional and working. This device is an amazing example of a what if. A collaboration of some of the brightest minds coming together to create something. One of only a few times where we've actually been able to see behind the curtain at Apple and see the development process in one of its most raw forms. And while this prototype isn't as functional as the regular prototypes that I show on this channel, that's simply a part of the beauty in it. There's no fancy development software, no apps that I can play around and show you all. Quite simply, this is a piece of hardware that was meant for one purpose and one purpose only, and that makes it special. It gives it more character and really shows just how much work Apple puts into making these devices that we use every single day. And I'm glad that this true piece of history gets to be preserved. I really hope you enjoyed this video, as it was quite literally months in the making. Please consider leaving a like and even consider subscribing, as it really helps motivate me to continue to create more content just like this and show you all these true pieces of developmental Apple history. Anyways, I hope you all have a great day.